ago, and guess what happened? So everything was stopped. So we got out our recipes, we got our heads together, and put this together for you today. And we thank you so much for coming out on this rainy day. We do have some more platters of food coming out. We've got quite a few different treats. There's clotted cream on the table and jam, which you can put on your scone if you wish. There are also some cream puffs, and I see some Filipino wrapped plantains that are delicious. There's little ham sandwiches and cucumber sandwiches with dill, and I see quite a few other pastries, and there's grapes and cheese coming out. There's wine on the table. There's also hot water in the urn over there if anyone cares to have herb tea instead of the potted tea that we prepared for today. It's easier to do that if someone wants something else for a choice. We also have someone who's going to perform for a few minutes while you're eating. His name is Bernard Schaller, and he is a flamenco guitarist, and he played at an event that we had a year ago for Roberto Reyes, who is buried here at Maple Grove, and his wife is here today. So we welcome Bernard Schaller, and he'll be out in a minute. Thank you so much.
This table?
Bernard for a lovely performance. Thank you. And now we'll get on to the next part of our program. But before we do, I just wanted to point out several things. We've got 2 art exhibits going on. One is downstairs, which are paintings by Rita Wilmers, who is an artist who lives now in Forest Hills. And the theme of her paintings, which are in the entryway, they're all downstairs in different alcoves, and it's Untold Stories, Immigrants. And that's what we're all about. Our tea today is the Ellis Island Tea. We're honoring all of those behind us who came through Ellis Island, all the immigrants, probably a good portion of the 117,000 that are buried behind us. And 2 in particular we named on the flyer. These were infants, young children who didn't quite make it. They were sick and they passed away at the Ellis Island Hospital. And so we honor their memory, and they are buried here. So they finally did make it to, but a sad end though for their families. But they were able to locate them many years later. And in one case, it was almost 100 years later that the descendants of the family, one of them was found through the internet, was able to find where this uncle was buried. So Uncle Alfio is here. And another family who's connected with the Ridgewood Historical Society, one of his ancestors is also buried here as an infant from Ellis Island. So we remember them, and we remember them all. Also in our gallery here today, we have beautiful photographs that were taken by our speaker, Ganesha, who's going to come and talk about his travels. All of these photos that cover a good breadth of the earth, from Central Asia to a freighter trip to even North Korea. So it's quite a selection, so take time to take a look at them when you get a chance, and look at the descriptions, because they are quite spectacular, and he will tell you his story. Also, just a reminder to silence your cell phones, and if you don't know where they are, the restrooms are downstairs, the lower level on the left side of the waterfall, which is probably off by now. So, thank you all. Is there anything else? That's it. That's it.
Okay. Again, thank you very much for coming for our annual tea, which we haven't done in 3 years because of COVID, and so it's nice to have you all back. So we have a special presentation in honor of the immigrants as the Ellis Island Tea, and so we have Ganesh, who wrote this book, and he's going to tell you about his experiences, and so and his photographs. There's 30 of them hanging on the wall with a caption in each one. So without further ado, okay, Ganesh.
Hi everyone, thank you for making it here on this rainy day. I really appreciate it. So, long story short, I'm from Singapore. I'm 24 years old this year, and I made this trip when I was 19, 20. So it was a trip from here, Singapore, which is just a tiny dot here, where I spent the first 19, 20 years of my life, all the way to Canada, where I relocated. And the catch is that I made this trip without taking any flights. So pretty much made my way from Singapore all the way to Germany by land. And then taking a cargo ship across the Atlantic to go to the US, and then traveling up north to Canada. So I'm just gonna walk all of you through my trip. You know, I'll start with, how did this seemingly insane idea come about, how I actually did it, and the people I met along the way, the experiences I had, and post-trip, what I did to, stay in contact with the people, and also help them out, the people who helped me along the way. So, when I was young, I was a bit weird. I'm still weird in some ways. But, kids like to watch cartoons and whatnot. I like to watch travel shows. Not travel shows, where you go to Europe and stuff, but more of like people going to like places you've never heard of and countries that most people don't even know exist. And those sort of shows really interested me. And one of the trips that was often featured was the Singapore to London or London to Singapore overland trip. A lot of people and a lot of presenters, a lot of the shows featured this trip because it's basically traveling from one end of the Eurasian continent all the way to the other end. And at the age of 10, I told myself that's something I really want to do because, it seems fun, it seems adventurous, it seems like it's going to be an adventure of a lifetime. So at the age of 18 in Singapore, I had to join the army. We have conscription for 2 years. So I enlisted in the army for 2 years. And during that time, I was also deciding on what should I do after my service. Where should I go? If I want to relocate, which country should it be? And basically thinking about life post military and my life in general. So it was then that I was like, okay, Canada seems like a very nice place to go to. I was also looking into something more long term. So eventually permanent residency, and Canada was this country where it's very easy to relocate to. It still is very easy to relocate to because it's pretty open, very friendly to immigrants, and so Canada seemed like a good choice. And I was like, I'm going to go to Canada to study. And my trip was my service in the military was ended in October 2018, and my school was only going to start in September 2019. So I was like, hey, I've got like 10 months of free time. I could do two things, either work or just travel, And I've already been in the army, it's pretty stressful. I already made some money in there. So I didn't want to continue working for the next 10 months. And also, 10 months of free time is not something we would get ever again. Something I think I will never get ever again. I hope I'm wrong, but I was trying to be realistic there. And so I was like, okay, fine. The only natural thing to do during this 10-month gap is to do some form of traveling. So I was like, okay, I'm going to travel from Singapore all the way to London. Then I thought about it, and I'm like, London seems very arbitrary. It just seems. In my life, or at least in my life thus far, London is just pretty much another city. Yes, I always wanted to do this overland trip, but why stop at London? Why not just make this challenge an even greater challenge, try to make my way across the Atlantic and go all the way to Montreal, where I was going to relocate to without taking any flights. And so that was how this entire trip came about. So I'm a very last-minute person. I didn't even know when I was going to leave my home in Singapore until, let's say, the day before my trip. My bags weren't even packed until like 30 minutes before I left my gate. It was my mom and my dad was like, I tried to explain to them what I was going to do, but I think because of how great the distance this was, and basically the trip, how crazy it seemed, it never really registered in them. They just thought I was going to leave home for just another trip. So they were like, are you sure you're going to leave in like 30 minutes? I'm like, yeah, give me some time, let me pack. Packed everything, and I was off to the bus station, and I was on to my next destination, which was Malaysia. So the first month or so, first month, 2 months, I spent some time in Southeast Asia, which is my backyard. So countries like Malaysia, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. To be honest, in my mind, I was like, this is going to be the least exciting part of my trip, the more boring one, because those countries were just neighboring countries that I've already visited with family, with friends. So I was pretty well acquainted with the culture and how things work in that country, in those countries. Nonetheless, I did some fun stuff. I did lots of couch surfing. So couch surfing is this very unique concept. If you ask some people, they might tell you just stay at someone's house for free, but I think it's way more than that. Basically, a local usually, will host foreigners for free, and it's a form of cultural and linguistic and cross-cultural exchange. So it's a very good way to meet people, and it's also a very good way to save money, of course, and also a very good way to see a place through the lens of a local. I think that's the kind of traveling I really wanted to see. I didn't want to travel to take photos. I did take photos, but the main goal wasn't to take photos of those highlights and of those landmarks. I wanted to see how people lived. I wanted to see how people, how people function, how societies function. Wanted to taste their food, and wanted to just see the places through the lens of a local. And I think couch surfing was a very great way for that to happen. So I started couch surfing in Malaysia, in Thailand, took buses, I hitchhiked, took trains, just to make my way north. And then I went to Laos, and in Laos I took a longboat down the Mekong River. So the longboats serve as a vital form of transportation for many of these remote villages along the river. And these villages are really isolated, so it's very hard and the Laotian government hasn't really invested much in public transportation and on land, on roads and stuff like that. So, the only way to reach these isolated villages is through the longboats. And, all sort of goods into these remote communities, the people, the only way they get in and get out is through these longboats. And I was very fortunate to hop onto one and see, basically how life is along this very important and major river. Then I went to Cambodia, Vietnam, and then I finally entered China. So China's huge, and the distances. Just before I move on, so my budget a day was $20, and that's it. It included everything: accommodation, food, miscellaneous stuff. What else? Food. I can't think of transportation. So yeah, I had to do everything in $20, under $20, and if I were to exceed my budget, I'm gonna go broke. So yeah, so every day it was a struggle between trying to find a balance between creature comforts, getting to a place, and at the same time making sure I don't run out of cash midway during the trip. So I made it to China. So this is China. And China is this huge country, so I needed to make my way across the country as quickly as possible because I have a Singaporean passport. It's a very strong passport. I don't need visas for most countries. China included, but I only had 15 days to basically be in that country before I needed to get out. And I wanted to spend a month in that country because it's such a huge country that it would be a waste if I just spent 15 days just traveling through the country. So I needed to do a visa run. So I chose to go to North Korea so that I could exit the country and re-enter China so that it resets the calendar. So I took trains from the Vietnamese border to the city of Guangzhou, and from Guangzhou I went up to Shanghai and Beijing, and this was during peak Lunar New Year season. Okay, so the whole country, China's this amazing country that's huge and has industrialized a lot. So most of the factories where people work are along the coast, whereas a large segment of the population is from the hinterland, from the interior. And the only time these people get to visit their hometown is during the Chinese New Year, the Lunar New Year period. And so all the tickets for all the trains were booked. And there was me, pretty last minute, didn't know where I was going the next day, pretty clueless as to what time I'll arrive at my next destination. Just turned up, you know, trying to get myself onto a train, only to realize that every seat is taken. People are all lined up on the corridor and the aisle of the train, and the only place that was left was pretty much outside the toilet. So it's a pretty interesting experience. I got to hear and smell pretty... Okay, I will not describe it, but you know, at least it got me from one place to another. So in Shanghai, I told myself that, I was thinking about it, and I was like, I have a tent on, I should get a tent, I should get a sleeping bag, because it's not always you find someone on couch surfing, or you can find a very affordable or cheap accommodation. So if I don't find that, where am I going to sleep, right? So yeah, I bought a tent and a sleeping bag, and then I made my way even more north to Beijing, which is the Chinese capital, and I stayed with this person. Thankfully, I bought a tent and a sleeping bag in Shanghai, because in Beijing, my couch surfing host, he seemed nice in the beginning. We explored a bit. Then at night, I was molested by my couch surfing host. It happens. Okay, it happens. It's not like every host does it, but it does happen. And I didn't know how to handle the situation. So I was supposed to stay with this host for two nights. I left on the second day. And I had another night in Beijing, and I was like, shit, where am I going to stay next, right? And part of me also wanted to go to the Great Wall of China. So I was brainstorming some things. I remember I was outside of McDonald's using their Wi-Fi, their free Wi-Fi, because I was too broke to buy my own SIM card. And I was like, wait, the Great Wall of China is over like 2,000, 3,000 miles long. There's no way the government is maintaining every single inch of it. There should be sections of it that are abandoned, right? So it'd be pretty cool if I could bring my tent and sleeping bag, go to an abandoned section in mid-February, and spend the night there. So I was like, okay, let's do this thing. So I looked through the internet. In China there's no Google, by the way, it doesn't work, so you have to use a Chinese search engine due to censorship reasons. And it was like I was 5-6 pages into the search results before I finally found a web page in English. I looked into it. It was last written in 2008. This was in 2019. So I'm like, okay, fine, this is the only information I can work with. I don't know how dated it is. I don't even know if it's going to bring me to the right place, but let's work with this. So after changing 3-4 buses, I reached the end of the line. This time around, I'm like easily about 6-7 hours away from Beijing. The bus stopped and the driver was screaming at me. And I realized that, okay, that's the end of the line, got out, and it was a small village. It was, in fact, just a hamlet. 4 houses, that's about it. It was around 3 p.m. So, winter, sun sets at 5, so I have 2 hours left. And the Great Wall of China is built on the top of hills. So it joins from one hilltop to the next, and it was built to keep out barbarians, basically the barbarians from the north, from attacking the Chinese capital during ancient times. So I ran up the hill, came to the wall, only to realize the wall was at least 6 floors high, built to keep out barbarians. And here I am, pretty short, with like a 50-pound backpack and everything in it, trying to figure out how the hell do I scale this behemoth. So I looked around. Time wasn't on my side because, at this point I was just an hour away from sunset. Looked around, it was an abandoned section, so there was a part of it that had caved in. So it was like an 80-degree incline. But the beauty of the wall is that it's made out of bricks. So, there were bricks protruding, which made it a natural step, and made it natural for me to just hold on to it brick by brick, climb up brick by brick, make my way up. So I did that. did that. It was scary at first, but I was like, I can do this. Just look up, don't look down, and everything will be fine. So I did that. Climbed up, climbed up, climbed up. And midway, about 4 floors high, I held onto one brick, and just before I, placed all my weight onto that brick and pulled myself up, that brick fell. And I was like, damn. Yeah, I was like, damn, what do I do? So, it was the first time in my life I prayed for some divine intervention. Not very proud to say that, because before that I was very atheist. Right now I'm still sort of, so nothing has changed, nothing much has changed. So, stood there for 10 minutes, tried to gain composure, and I was like, I can do this thing. So I did it. Made it to the top, and then every mile or so there was a watchtower. So I was like, that's probably the most natural place to pitch a tent and sleep in. So I ran on the wall, on the rampart, but you have to realize that this is an abandoned wall, right? So there were shrubs, there were trees. It was really hard to run, but I had to run because, first of all, the nearest watchtower was a mile away, and I was about 45 minutes from sunset. Yeah. So I made it to the watchtower and pitched my tent. So my ego is too big for me to open up the instruction pamphlet. So I just laid everything down and tried figuring out how to, pitch a tent. So I could have done it in 10 minutes, but it took me an hour. By the time I was done, it was pretty much pitch black dark. So I slept in it, or I tried at least. But it's a watchtower, so you have these small holes that were, vantage points, sort of like windows. And these watchtowers were perched on hills. We know how the top of hills are like. The winds are really strong. And these small cavities acted like funnels. So they really tried to destroy my tent. So what I did was I placed my bag on one side and placed some bricks on the other to make sure that at least it doesn't fly away and I'm able to be inside. Secondly, I'm from the equator. Okay, I've never really experienced winter before. I didn't know when winter started, when winter ended. In my mind, winter was something that's, that reached its peak in December, and by February it's pretty much spring. I mean, the Chinese sometimes call the lunar festival Spring Festival. So in my mind I was like, okay, it's going to be spring. So I was very thirsty, with all this mess of running up and trying to set things up, racing against time. I didn't feel the cold. But once when I was comfortable inside my tent, I sort of realized that it was -20 outside. -20, -30. The bottle of water I had just frozen through. I couldn't drink anything. I couldn't even sleep, to the point that I had to sit cross-legged with my, feet tucked under my butt, because that was the only way I could keep myself warm and not die. But at the same time, that kept me warm. I didn't get any sleep. Next morning, I woke up, I looked around, and I was like, damn, this is so beautiful. Though couldn't see any form of civilization or any form of human activity as far as the eyes could see. And I had a seventh wonder of the world all for myself. I think this is something money can't buy. So for all that hassle and all that effort that I put into doing this, I was like, it paid off, and there are no regrets. So I made myself back to Beijing, and then after that I went to North Korea. I needed to reset my visa, right? North Korea is pretty interesting, because it's one of those countries where you actually learn way more about it from the outside, than when you visit it. The only way in is by a guided tour, and it's very, you will be monitored by the guides. And the guides even monitor themselves. So the guides never work alone. The guides always work in pairs. And the two guides, the two North Korean guides, are always by each other's side. Because it's a way of making sure that one guide doesn't say something offensive or doesn't have get any wrong ideas. So it was it was a 5-day all expense paid trip into North Korea. And the irony is that in this country, where the UN says that more than 50% of the country is starving, not getting fed well, that was the time I was fed the best because everything was paid, right? So it was really nice, in the sense that I got fed well, but it's exactly like how you see in the TV. I don't know how to describe it. Just that you have to filter things. Not everything you say might be the truth. Some of the things that are told to you might be outright lies. But as an individual, as a responsible individual, I wanted to be careful. I wanted to be. I didn't want to place my guides in danger too. So there will be this urge to actually ask my guide, for example, a guide, what do you think of all this? Do you think or do you know it's a lie? But at the same time, I know that they're being watched by another guide. And it places them in a very tough situation where on one hand, they could be like, screw the system, we are all being fed nonsense. In the other hand, if they admit that, they don't know that it's a lie, then it sort of proves whatever the outside world is saying, that this country is heavily censored and that it's an oppressive place to live in. So lots of questions I wanted to ask didn't get answered. Remember going to many places, and the first thing we had to do was basically just bow down to like the leader's statue or a portrait. There were very strict rules on how the portraits could be taken, how photos can be taken of those portraits or statues. You cannot cut the bodies into half. You cannot turn your phone to landscape mode and take them, because then later, the leaders would be on their sides, and that's disrespectful. Yeah. And I come from the outside world where all this is pretty, where the leaders like Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, they're all pretty much mints, right? They are a lot of our jokes. We even made movies about them, the interview and stuff. And there you go, and this is something very serious. And you don't want to laugh, you don't want to get yourself in trouble, you don't want to get other people in trouble. So, that was that. So, there was a huge disparity between the capital, Pyongyang, where the elites lived, and the rest of the country. I remember taking a train from the Chinese border all the way to Pyongyang, and in the countryside, you'll just see miles and miles and miles of barren landscape. Houses that were probably built maybe 5 decades ago, 6 decades ago, after the Korean War, and nothing much has changed. A lot of people on bicycles, because the country is under heavy economic sanctions, so they can't get fuel. Pretty much a very depressive place. And then once when you reach the capital, where the elites lived, that's where everything becomes super bright and it's pretty modern. It's not exactly like in New York, but you have some neighborhoods, with big skyscrapers and apartments that wouldn't be too out of place from, let's say, Manhattan. So there was this huge disparity. And so how do you become an elite in North Korea? It's very simple. You can't. It's pretty much determined during the Korean War. So who your ancestors allied themselves with? Did they fight for the communist regime or they didn't? Was your family a peasant, or was your family part of the nobility? If your family was part of the nobility, today in North Korea you would be banished to the countryside and living a very not so good life. If your ancestors were peasants and they fought for the communist regime, you would probably be living in Pyongyang holding a pretty good post. So I made it back to China, and then I made a train ride across much of the country from from the North Korean border all the way to Urumqi. So that took me about at least 4 days of just sitting on the train, outside the toilet, hearing all those shit. You get it. So I made it to Urumqi. So Urumqi is the capital of Xinjiang province. Xinjiang is a very unique province because it's part of China, but the majority of the people who live there are Uyghur Muslims. And they speak this language called Uyghur, which is a Turkic language. And they use the Arabic script to write their things, and the majority of them are Muslims. So there are, for a long time, these people wanted separation from China. They wanted to be independent because they see themselves as a different people from the rest of China, and they, and they just want their own homeland, right? But the Chinese are not very keen on letting them giving them independence. So, I've been to many places prior to that. I've been to places like Israel. Even my country is pretty militarized, but never in my life I've seen that density of police stations in a city. Every block had one, pretty much. And if you wanted to cross, for example, a road and wanted to use an underpass for it, you had to go through security checks. So they're pretty discriminatory. Okay, if you were Chinese and you looked Chinese, you didn't need to go through the security checks to enter markets and public facilities. If you're Uyghur, you had to stand at least 30 minutes in line just to go through these security checks. So I was getting I look Uyghur because I'm pretty tan for a Chinese, so they were like, yeah, you have to go through security checks and whatnot. But after a while, I realized that if you just talk to them in English, whoever who is doing the security check, they will realize that you're a foreigner and just give you a free pass. So that worked out for me. So after Urumqi, I remember I was in a hostel. There's no couch surfing in Urumqi or in Xinjiang as a whole because the government really wants to know where you are. They've got everyone. They want to know where all the foreigners are, so you're going to get registered on the system. I remember on the train from Beijing all the way to Urumqi, I had a policeman who came to me and took my fingerprints, went through my phone, and yeah, so they wanted to know where I was and they wanted to know who I was, went through my passports and stuff. So I remember I just arrived in Urumqi. I was sitting down on the sofa of the hostel, very tired from 4 days worth of train ride. And then this group of policemen just walked up to the receptionist, and they were having a conversation and couldn't understand a word they were saying. And then he just took out a piece of paper and handed it to the receptionist. And on that piece of paper was my photo. So I was like, damn. So I went up to the receptionist and I asked her, he has my photo, what's the reason for that? And the receptionist just played dumb, so couldn't figure out what happened. So Urumqi used to be on the Silk Road. So the Silk Road used to be this used to be a trading road that stretched all the way from China to the Middle East and Europe. And before the advent of ships, before cross or transoceanic shipping was a thing, this was the way goods got from the Middle East to China, and from China to Europe, and from Europe to the Middle East. And Xinjiang was positioned on this route, and so it was a Silk Road city. But the Chinese government, in their attempt to modernize the entire city, had raised all these centuries-old buildings, and today all you would see is just condominiums after condominiums after condominiums. So that was pretty sad, and I was very eager to see something Silk Road related, only to realize that all of them had been, demolished to make way for shopping centers and malls and whatnot. So I took a train from Urumqi south to this place. It's not on the map, but it's called Kashgar. So Kashgar is another Silk Road city in Xinjiang. Xinjiang is China's largest province, and the distances were large. I think it took me at least a day and a half. So again, a day and a half of sitting outside the toilet and getting harassed by the police on the train. Arrived at the train station, was making my way out, and this policeman just screamed at me. And I thought he was addressing the guy behind me, but no, he pointed at me. So he asked me where was I going to stay. I said, I don't know. And he was like, you have to stay in this particular hotel. So it was a hotel that was about $200 a night. And I told him I can't afford it, I'm not going to stay there. And he was like, if you're not going to stay there, you're going to go home. Pretty direct. So I was like, okay, fine. And he walked up to a taxi driver, talked to him, probably told him, bring this guy all the way to this hotel, make sure he gets in. So got into a taxi driver knew where was I going, dropped me off there. So entered the reception, the hotel lobby, and there was this girl who was Chinese, and she was having an argument with someone at the reception. And I walked up to her and I was like, what's happening? And she was like, oh, I have a friend here, and this, she was traveling with a friend from France, a French woman, and the receptionist wouldn't allow the Chinese girl to sleep in the same room with her French friend because she was scared that the French friend might teach her things like democracy and stuff. So I was like, okay, not this shit again. So apparently that debate got so heated at the lobby that the Chinese girl just called, the local tourism agency, but it was late at night, and so, as per normal, when no one picks up at the tourism office, the line got diverted to the local police station. So the police came in, and I mean, when the police in Xinjiang turns up, it's not like a bunch of cops who just turn up with a pistol. I mean, these guys were in SWAT gear. They were dressed up more as like a SWAT team than a regular municipal cop. 8 of them came and they were like, what's the problem? And once when the girl told them, is it true that Chinese people can't sleep in the same room with a French woman? Then they were like, okay, it's not really a problem, so they left. So it was pretty interesting. Next day, I tagged along with these 2 girls because it was easier for me. I didn't speak the language, the Chinese girl did. And, it just went around, looking through the city, came back, and I was taken aside at the lobby. And I was like, what's happening now? And then this guy dressed up in SWAT gear walked around and basically handed out something that looked like a Q-tip to everyone and was like, we need your DNA, all the foreigners' DNA now. So I was like, okay, fine, I don't want to argue. I know it's probably going to be in the system for the rest of my life, but I don't think I committed any crime. Don't think any of my family members would commit any crimes. So gave them my DNA. That's what you want, that's what you get. So yeah, I gave it to them. It was such a hassle. So when I finally crossed so this was maybe about 4 months into the trip, 3 months into the trip now, and in end February, early March, I finally crossed the border into Kyrgyzstan, which is my first ex-Soviet Central Asian country. So for about the next 2 months, so March, April, and parts of May 2019, I spent all my time hitchhiking across the Central Asian countries of Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. So lots of stans there. Very interesting because those countries, we tend to have a learning point that I got from traveling in this part of the world is that not everything is really that black and white, not everything is as straightforward as they seem. We portray things like colonialism, things like the Soviet Union in a very negative, 100% negative light. But once when you go there and you talk to the people, you sort of realize that people often talk about this certain heyday, this certain, they're yearning for a time where everything was good, and ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, everything sort of went downhill. So these countries are not really that resource rich, especially the smaller ones like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. And when they were part of the Soviet Union was just one huge country. So the Soviet Union, to spruce up the economies of these more far-flung regions, built factories, built industries there, though it didn't make any economic sense, in order to make sure that people were employed, they had industries moved to these very remote places. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, so did these industries, and the jobs left. And so a large segment of society became unemployed overnight. The economies of these countries were devastated. Inflation went off the roof to the point where people's life savings was reduced to nothing. And the effects of it are still felt until today. During the early 90s, these countries, in an attempt to assert their national pride or their the distinct culture, so in Uzbekistan you have the Uzbeks, Kyrgyzstan you have the Kyrgyz, Kazakhstan you have the Kazakhs. What they did was they removed Russian from the curriculum, they removed Russian as an official language, and they just taught their kids Kyrgyz, Uzbek, Kazakh, Tajik. But that led to a problem very quickly, because now you have a bunch of people who only spoke Uzbek, only spoke Tajik, only spoke Kyrgyz, living in a country where the economy was in shambles. So people were unemployed. So they quickly had to reverse their decision and to teach Russian to these people, include Russian in their curriculum, so that, at least now, the people who never find a job back home can at least go to Russia and be able to work there and send their remittances back home. So, hitchhiking culture was very easy across the Central Asian countries, because during the Soviet times, there were three things. There was the party, there was free healthcare, free education and stuff, and there was a severe lack of almost everything. You stood in line for 20 years to get a car, 10 years to get a fridge. So, public transportation was your only way to get around, for the most part. And in the rural parts of the countries, there wasn't much public transportation anyway. So people hitchhiked a lot. The only people who had private vehicles were the elites and the military guys. So hitchhiking, during that period, hitchhiking sort of grew, and it has sort of stuck on, though, the ownership of private vehicles is certainly on the rise in this region today. There are three ways to hitchhike. You could just stand by the side of the road, put up your thumb, and hope that someone stops. Second would be putting up a sign, writing your destination on a sign and putting it up, and letting the whole world know where you're going. And if anyone is going in that direction, they would stop. And the third would be to just walk up to someone who is fueling up at a gas station and ask them, like, hey, are you going to this place? Or at least could you drop me on this highway? So these are the three ways to do it. In Kyrgyzstan, it was so easy. You just need to put up your thumb like that and anyone would stop. So it was really nice. Also, my life was super easy because I speak Russian. So it was very easy to communicate with the people there. And along the way, first it starts with hitchhiking. You hitchhike, and then the people are like, what are you up to? You give them the whole story, and then they're like, come to my house, you can stay in my house. And that's how, I stayed with this family of farmers and bakers for like 10 days. Help them with the baking, help them with the delivery runs. I mean, their delivery runs were scenic. It took me past on roads that hugged cliffs and was on the shoreline of gorgeous lakes, and you had snow-capped mountains, just lush fields. I don't think there's any vocabulary that can describe it. Unfortunately, as I told you, I'm not someone who takes a lot of photos. I mean, I did take some. I didn't take photos of any of those landscapes, so yeah, I'll let your imagination, just imagine how it looked like, okay? So, got a very good insight of how the people lived there, and it was the best part of my travels. So, got to explore the Silk Road cities of Samarkand, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and got to see the mountains of Tajikistan, and then I got into Turkmenistan. So a lot of us know what North Korea is, but we don't know what Turkmenistan is. Turkmenistan is sort of like Vegas meets Pyongyang, in the sense that it's this very rich, not very rich, but okay, comparatively speaking, pretty rich for a Central Asian country. because it has huge gas reserves along the Caspian Sea here. Okay, huge deposits of gas. And that's how the country became rich, but it was ruled, and it's still ruled by a president who is nuts. So, just to know how nuts he was, he built statues of himself that were made of gold. And not only that, he wanted the statues to be on pedestals that would rotate so that they would always face the sun. He rebuilt the entire capital out of white marble and gold because he used to be a dentist, hence the color choice. He said he didn't like cars with any other colors except for white, and this decision was probably made in one night, so the following day all other cars couldn't drive on the road. One day he decided to close hospitals across the country and only have the hospitals in the capital function. And so people outside the country, outside the capital, had no hospitals to go to. And he changed the dates and the days and the names of days and months to that of his mother, to himself, to things that meant a lot for him. Wrote an entire book that's just gibberish, it's just a man ramblings put into words, and forced everyone to memorize it. And if you wanted to pass a driving test, you better make sure you know which verse belonged to which chapter and what the content was, because if not, you're not passing your driving test. So, he passed away in 2006, and someone less crazy than him took over. So most of the rules are still in place, except maybe, there were no, the book thing that was done away with. But still, a lot of portraits, a lot of gold statues on rotating pedestals, a lot of very restrictive rules were still put in place. I got a transit visa, so you need to get a visa to go into Turkmenistan, and most foreigners would go on a tourist visa, which means you need a guide. And a guide means lots of regulation, lots of, you're pretty much tied up to someone and you can't do much. But I got a transit visa because I was traveling from Uzbekistan to Iran. So I was able to wander on my own. And the beauty of, or rather the good thing about Turkmenistan is that the government artificially inflates the value of the Turkmen manat, which is the local currency, to the US dollar. So officially it's sold at 3.5 Turkmen manat to the US dollar. But in reality, the value of the manat is more of like 22 to 25 Turkmen manat to the US dollar. All you needed to do is walk into a market, talk to some random person, some random vendor, just give them some US dollars, and they would give you the unofficial, the black market rate. So, when I was in Ashgabat, the Turkmen capital, I got to eat very lavishly, got to eat in 5-star restaurants, got to stay in a 5-star hotel, got to enjoy myself, spoil myself a bit. Of course, every restaurant had their portrait of the president staring down at you and whatnot. So I was walking around Ashgabat, and one day, the streets are empty, by the way. The capital's streets are empty, because the rules to live in Ashgabat, which is the capital, to live in one of those marble and golden buildings is so onerous, it's so difficult to reach. No one actually lives there. So they're empty. Every morning at peak hour at 8 a.m. you would see women going around sweeping the streets. They're already immaculate, they're already super clean. So I don't know what they were dusting. There was not a single car in sight. So I was walking around a certain park, probably being the only foreigner, or one of the few foreigners in the capital without a guide walking around, and then I saw a bunch of guys just standing in the middle of the road and looking at me like that. So I couldn't figure out what was happening, right? But I didn't realize they were looking at me until 2 hours later when those guys were in that exact same position, doing nothing but just looking at me. Then it dawned upon me, it's probably the secret police. So I took a bus to a nearby mall, only person on the bus, and when I took the bus, all of them scurried to their car and drove alongside the bus. And then when I got off the bus, they also got off the car. And when I decided to go and eat at this certain 5-star restaurant, they also ate at that same 5-star restaurant. So that was a pretty interesting and pretty, I wasn't nervous, you know. I wasn't nervous. I mean, what could they do to me? I was thinking, they could kidnap me, but I'm a pretty difficult person. So they'll probably let me go within a few hours or at least days. And, I don't have much information, I'm not a spy. I am not there for like nefarious reasons. I'm just there because I need to get to Canada, right? So, yeah, that was it. So, oh, by the way, the internet there doesn't work. So, no matter what I do, I couldn't access any form of social media, any form of any websites that we are all used to. So that was my 5 days in Turkmenistan, getting chased by the secret police. So from Turkmenistan, when the moment I crossed into Iran, I think I'm probably the only person in the entire world who would say this. It felt so liberating. Finally, I could access the internet, though a very censored version, but still at least I could access something. Finally, I could see people, which I didn't see that much of in Turkmenistan. Finally, I could roam around without being harassed by the secret police, I hope. Though the guy who chopped my passport when I was entering Iran basically told me in my face, make sure no political stuff, okay? No political stuff. So I was like, yes, sure. So I couch surfed in Mashhad, which is a city, which is Iran's second largest city towards near the border with Turkmenistan and Afghanistan. With this guy named Irfan, who was a 19, 20-year-old kid who was doing everything else. He was going to university, but he was doing everything else but going to university. So he was hosting these foreigners and stuff, having foreign friends, just enjoying life. So he was like, do you want to go to a party? I'm like, yeah, sure. So just in case you guys didn't know, Iran is a very Islamic country. It's an Islamic Republic. That's the name, that's the official name of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran. And, so you can't find pork there, you will not be able to find alcohol there. Converting out of the religion is a crime punishable by death. They claim to have some form of religious freedom in the sense that you could choose from a list of pre-approved religions to join, but the laws are that if you're Muslim, you can't convert outside the religion because there will be apostasy and that would mean you get stoned to death. And that religion shouldn't contradict Islam. So the main tenet of Islam is, there is one God and Muhammad is the final prophet. And so any religion that contradicts that, so let's say if you are Hindu, where you have many gods, that will be banned. Or if you are following a monotheistic religion, so still one God, but it has a prophet after Muhammad, then that religion too is banned. So there's a huge Baha'i community in Iran which believes that there was a prophet after Muhammad, and they're called Baha'is, and those people are basically oppressed. They cannot go to university, they are denied jobs, the secret police harasses this community. So this is how things work in Iran, at least legally. So, but Irfan was like, let's go to an Iranian party. I went to the Iranian party and there were literally lots of drugs and people drinking alcohol, homebrewed of course, and women have to wear a headscarf, the hijab, but no one was wearing any hijab there. And I asked Irfan, and it was on a rooftop, okay, in a residential neighborhood. There were lots of rap that was being blasted. Rap is frowned upon, but that didn't stop them from playing Nicki Minaj. So there was that. And I asked Irfan, don't you think this is pretty scary? And they were like, oh no worries. The host of this party, her father is the main, he's the head of the police department of this neighborhood, so we are pretty safe. I was like, perfect. So, the beauty of couch surfing is that you get to see things like that. You get brought to these sort of illegal things, or not illegal things, but these sort of things that only locals would know. You know, as a foreigner, you probably never see an alcohol-filled party in Iran. You know, because it's just super hard. It's usually hidden. But I got to see it, so I was very happy about it. You know, and for example, another instance, every Friday after the Friday, so in Iran it's a Muslim country, right? So Muslims go to the mosque to pray on Friday. It's like how Christians go to the church on Sunday, and that's the only day off. That's the only day. That's the only weekend. And my host, his name is Javad. He lived in Isfahan, which is another beautiful city in Iran. And he was like, "You want to go see a protest on Friday? It happens every Friday." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So you walk to this protest, okay, and all you see is basically a huge flag of America and Israel that's laid down on the floor, and everyone just stepping on it and you know, shouting death to America and death to Israel. So, you know, but when I was in Isfahan, I was already about 2 weeks into my trip, and Iranians are so hospitable people. You know, I could go into a restaurant, and the moment they realize I'm a foreigner, they're like, "No, you're not paying for it. It's fine. It's on us." You know, people go out of their way to help me. Hitchhiking was super easy. People would drive 100 miles out of their way to drop me because I'm a foreigner. So, you know, it was this contradiction. Like, I'm like, how is it that, you know, I've met these people who are so nice and so hospitable and so welcoming, and at the same time, you know, march on like another country's flag, you know, screaming death to this certain country and hoping that this country would burn to death or something like that. Then Javad was like, "Do you see all these buses lined up here?" I'm like, "Yeah." "Well, these people are all government workers and they have to come here, so they're all bussed in. Their attendance is taken, and there's also free food." So that's the only reason why everyone is there. So, you know, they're all holding these Iranian flags and whatnot during the protest, but after the protest, you see the Iranian flag lying on the floor right beside the American flag. So, so that's that, right? So, yeah, Iran is really beautiful. For a country, this country is under immense sanctions, yet when I was there, the public transportation system was really good. In the cities, the metros were better than the one in Europe, certainly better than the one you have here, the subway here. Clean, goes everywhere, super cheap. So it resembled a developed country in terms of infrastructure. Of course, a lot of the Chinese helping them a lot to overcome the sanctions. But at the same time, you know, the economy is not good, so the infrastructure is super good, but people can barely afford a meal. I was there during Ramadan. Ramadan is the Islamic month where people don't eat, or, you know, they fast, right? And it was at least about 100, 110, 100. On one day it went to 120 degrees because it was in the mid of June. So, and couldn't buy any food. So all I could do was just go to a supermarket, get something, go to a toilet and eat it. I don't know why, toilets feature a lot in my trip. So, yeah, so, you know, I was hosted by these Iranians, and I can tell you something, Iranians might seem like a very conservative bunch, you know, wearing the hijab and stuff, but you have to realize that this is the law, right? Back home, you know, the moment they enter, despite me being a guy, all the women's hijab just, you know, drops onto the floor, and, you know, they dress up like how people dress up here. You know, no one actually, I don't know anyone who fasted when I was in Iran. I mean, publicly, yes, everyone was, you know, not eating, but at home everyone was just whacking on food, you know, to compensate for the lack of food when in public. And I asked my host, this thing really stuck, left an impression on me. I asked him, you know, Ramadan, like, you know, why isn't anyone following it? Or, you know, are Iranians really religious? And he was like, not really. Us Iranians, we're not religious. We are pretty liberal. And in, you know, we used to have the Shah, the king, who used to look after us. And in 1979, he was really corrupt. He did a lot of bad things. And in 1979, we wanted to get rid of him. And the only way we saw fit was, you know, supporting whoever who opposed the Shah. And so we supported this guy called Imam Khomeini, who was a religious guy, because we wanted to get rid of the Shah at all costs. We got rid of the Shah only to replace him with something 10 times worse. So he was like, we have regrets, huge regrets, and we hope the situation changes. It was a very interesting experience in Iran. I saw people rebelling. For example, there's the morality police that basically tells women how to dress up. So their job is literally standing at busy intersections, looking at how women dress up, and if the headscarf is exposing too much of the hair, these policemen, almost always guys, would walk up to them and tell them to pull it forward. But I've seen instances where the policeman would go up to them and tell them to pull it forward, and the women just pull it all the way back, remove it, and pointed the middle finger at them. And I was like, girl, good job. So, Iran is beautiful. The architecture is beautiful. The beautiful mosques, the beautiful bazaars. I enjoyed, just wandering through them, looking at them, marveling at, the effort that people have placed into building these masterpieces. But at the same time, I also marveled at how Iranians, despite all this very difficult situation, tried to make the best out of it. Always smiley, always accommodating, though they've had very little to share. One of my hosts basically told me, you know what, we Iranians fast every day of the year because we can't afford meat. We only eat 2 meals a year or 1 meal, 2 meals a day or just 1 meal a day. So Ramadan or not, it's pretty much the same meals. And yet, when I was there, they went out of their way to get me all sort of food, all sort of meat food, from camel meat to sheep, cows. I mean, it was beef. It was really delicious. But at the same time, when I realized that all this bread was there just for me, when these people wouldn't even eat them on a special day, part of me felt bad, but at the same time, part of me, some part of me just felt very bad. And, I wanted to give them some cash to thank them for their hospitality, to make up for it, but they refused to accept. it. So, I've been through pretty much all across the world, and now I was going to Turkey and then onwards to Europe. So I know a lot of us would like to go to Europe and spend like summer there because it's interesting. But after having been through the deserts of Central Asia, seen the beautiful architecture of Iran, wandered through ancient cities in China, seen North Korea, beautiful temples in Thailand, Europe was pretty underwhelming. It just every city felt the same. Every church started to look the same after a while. Hitchhiking was really easy across Europe, but people were pretty mean to me because Europe at that point of time in June 2019 had a migrant crisis. So there were lots of people in Afghanistan and Pakistan who went through Iran, went through Turkey, and they were making their way across Europe to Germany. And apparently I looked like them. I looked like an Afghan. I looked like an Iranian who was doing this trip. And so people would just tell me to F off, or would spit at me when I was trying to hitchhike. But I held my head high. It comes often. When you're hitchhiking, you don't know when you'll get your next ride. You don't know where you'll end up that night. You don't even know if you'll make it to your next destination. But that was the beauty in it, right? You didn't know what was coming, and I saw a certain thrill in that. But it does get frustrating, when people outright tell you no, they can't give you a lift, or they just drive past. But I found a way to, there have been times I asked myself, especially when I was in the heat, why am, all my friends, all the people I know in my life, all back home enjoying AC in their apartment, house, and what the hell am I doing here in a country that, is thousands of miles away from home on a road that I didn't even know existed until 10 minutes ago. Is this all worth it? So I put my hand up, people rejected me, people drove off. But I told myself, it's their right, to reject me. It's not like I'm not making a demand, I'm requesting, and it's totally within their right to reject me, to not pick me up. So I shouldn't be angry because of that. In fact, it's normal for people not to pick up. I placed myself in their situation, especially if it was a woman. Would you pick up a random guy who's standing by the road? No, so, that was a very good coping mechanism, but eventually a good Samaritan would stop and, I would slowly hop from city to city by hitchhiking. In Europe, Europe is just expensive. So I had to cut down on the number of meals I had, to the point where sometimes I just couldn't afford to eat like cooked meals. I had to get like pasta and like a jug of pasta sauce, a spaghetti sauce, and I had to cook it, right? So the only way I could. Oh, by the way, so for accommodation in Europe, I mostly just pitched my tent and slept in city parks. And occasionally, like a few times, I would stand outside a hostel, see someone, make small chat, become their friends, and sometimes they would sneak me in. And, there would be a spare bed, so I would sleep there. Or sometimes they would even, just bring me in, and I would just ask them, can I use your kitchen in the hostel? And they're like, yeah, come in. So, that was how, I cooked my pasta and stuff. Pretty interesting experience, just living almost, I was pretty much homeless, right? But I was doing it out of choice, not because I was forced to do it. I just, I could always take the next flight back home and live normally, but, there was certain thrill, certain challenge that I wanted. Finally made it to Germany, so that was 7 months from Singapore all the way to Germany. And I got onto a cargo ship. I had to pay them a sum to get onto the cargo ship. And cargo ships, often change their schedule based on supply and demand. So I didn't know if I was departing until like a day before. But I got onto one, luckily, and it took me all the way from Bremerhaven in Germany and across the Atlantic to Charleston, South Carolina. I was 12 days at sea. I had my own room, which was pretty nice. I had 3 meals a day. Every meal was different. I got to sit with the captains. I got to, captains and the officers. So there was this. I saw something on the ship. First of all, I saw how things worked in the ship. People were just working 12-hour days. People were there just to work and that's about it. And any free time was mostly spent resting because it's such a grueling job, right? The sea was interesting for the first day, and then after that it becomes the same. Pretty boring. So just, and no one wanted to talk to me because everyone was either in the midst of doing something or was trying to get some rest before they had to do something. So I was pretty much alone. There was also an American couple on board. They went to Europe, but I'm not trying to be mean, but they were just, they were complaining about things like how everything was in German in Germany. I couldn't understand. And they brought up, and they were like, we hate Europe because people that have public transportation system, and in America we have freedom from public transportation. I don't want to be a slave to the schedule. And I was like, okay, that's a very interesting way to look at things. And then of course they would say things that were slightly disturbing, but I knew better to just be quiet or just play along. And they went on about how immigrants were all horrible people stealing their jobs in the US, and how there were things that were in Spanish on our food labels, and that pisses me off, and pisses them off and stuff like that. But no, but I'm not talking about immigrants like you. You're fine. It's just them, right? So I was like, okay, that's interesting. But if I thought that was pretty racist, then the staff on the ship. So it's just a crew of 28 men, and it was the officers and the people who were doing the, who were piloting the ship and who were doing the office work were mostly Eastern Europeans from Romania and Poland, and the guys who were doing the more laborious jobs like cleaning and maintenance were from Asia, mostly from the Philippines. And God, those Eastern Europeans didn't really treat those Asian guys very well. I don't know if they knew that I was from Asia and my country is just across the sea from the Philippines, but some of them would use words, would shout, would scream, call them names. Personally, I felt affected. But at the same time, I knew not to say anything simply because I didn't want to get thrown out of the ship. And at the same time, I saw that it was not my place. If I had stood up for them, it could have only made matters worse. And these guys are stuck on that ship for 8 months. So I got to the US, finally, the last part of my trip. Yeah, finally made it. So, I didn't know if I was actually going to make that. Thanks. I didn't know if I was actually going to make that jump, across the pond. Because everything else, I could, if a border is closed, I could just go to another country and, could somehow make my way to Europe. But how do you cross the sea without taking a plane? The only way is pretty much through a ship, right? And how many of us here know how to book a cargo ship? That was my first time taking a cargo ship. So, that was the biggest variable, the weakest link in the chain. And I was so glad that I was finally in the US, finally, on the same continent as my final destination, Canada. So everything else is going to be super easy after this, right? Relatively speaking. And so, right now the running joke with so if you think about it, we're talking about Ellis Island, a lot of them came by ship, right? I mean, I too came by ship, not through Ellis Island, but pretty much the same. I made this journey. I think for them it was more torturous, definitely, and it took them longer. For me, not so torturous, though, it was pleasant at times and unpleasant at times. So the running joke between me and my friends is that I came fresh off the boat. Yeah, so who here watches that show? Oh, perfect, I love that show, I watch it a lot. And I can relate to it a lot because, that's pretty much from my culture, right? So, yeah. So after that was mostly just driving up, across the eastern seaboard and passed through New York I met my family here actually, mom and dad here in New York. I was 8 to 9 months into the trip and they have not seen me for 8 to 9 months. They didn't know where I was most of the time. They couldn't join the dots, realizing I made my way all the way from Singapore to New York without any flights. All they did was hop onto a 20-hour flight from Singapore to New York, which is the longest flight in the world. So they landed, picked them up. It was pretty nice. We entered Canada together, we went to Montreal together, so it was pretty nice that the people who took care of me and brought me to life started the trip with me. They were there when I left Singapore and also ended it together with me. So I think that was a very poignant, how would you say, yeah, basically that, whatever that was. So I finally made it to Montreal. And does anyone want to guess why did I go to Canada? And what am I studying in Canada?
International affairs.
French.
Aviation.
Travel.
Well, today I'm a flight instructor. Yeah, good job. Yeah, so I decided to. I started to become a pilot, and today I'm a flight instructor. I teach people how to fly planes. So that is also a huge irony of this trip. Thank you. So there is something that, the trip ended. There were lots of people I met along the way. A lot of people asking me about my trip, and I always wanted to write a book about my trip. There wasn't time to write it because I'm in a new country. I have to start everything from scratch. If you move to a country fresh off the boat, you would understand where I'm coming from. You have to look for a new job. You have to adjust to a new culture, new language. Start your social life from scratch. Do the administrative stuff, the paperwork. Those things. It can get very frustrating at times. And I also wanted to write a book, but it was something I had to put on the back burner because I had a million other more important stuff to do. So luckily for me, in March 2020, COVID happened. And so we were all stuck at home. And that meant that I had time to write my book, so I wrote my book during COVID. So I actually I met all these beautiful people along the way who helped me, though they didn't need to. Sometimes went way out of their ways, literally, to make sure that I made it safe and sound to my next destination, right? Last year, 2022, I wanted to help these people for a long time. And I was brainstorming ways, and at the same time, a lot of people I know asked me, like, how did, I want to travel like how you did. I want to go to the places that you went to. So I was like, let's start a travel agency, a tour agency. So last year I started The Untold Direction, which is a tour agency. Pretty different from most because our tours only have 6 people maximum. So that way, and the reason why the groups are very small is because we want to make our travelers travel and see things through the lens of a local. I mean, we do the fun stuff too, we do the interesting stuff, but I also believe that if you travel and if you don't learn anything, then a huge part of the trip is wasted. I think traveling is a very good way to be educated, or to get some education, learn how and see how things work, but at the same time, have fun, take those beautiful photos, visit those landmarks. And with that in mind, I created this tour company, and that was, 6 people with a guide. And the guides, I made sure that most of my guides had, spoke English pretty well. And another big thing I wanted them to not have was any form of guiding experience, because I believe that everyone should be given a chance. And I wanted some new blood into this industry. So it was really interesting because I had to reconnect with a lot of people that I met on the trip. But eventually I managed to connect to quite a substantial number of people to, not only be my guide, but I'm also like, your house is pretty far into the countryside. My travelers will be pretty interested to experience your life, see how farming works, see how people bake, see how people, how you bake stuff, how you function, how your community functions. They would like to visit your schools, they would like to see your events, your community events and stuff like that. Why don't, you host some of my travelers? This way you could get some extra cash because, there's not much economy in those places anyway, so any amount would be a lifesaver for them. And at the same time, you have these travelers who are able to pay and afford the luxury of traveling, see a very unique part of the world and experience it just like a local. So Untold Direction trips, I'm trying to make sure that this is not a sales pitch, but it sounds like it. So we bring them to Central Asian countries. We're going to open trips to Iran. Then we're going to open trips to this part of the world, the Caucasus too. And most of our trips are small trips, 6 people. And we do lots of homestays. We travel around with, not in a bus, like a coach or anything like that. We travel taking public transportation because that's how the locals travel. It gives you a very good insight into how things work, right? Travel on 3rd class between the cities, like how any local would, just to experience how things work. So, yeah. And yeah, so I think I've come to the end of my presentation. I drove 14 hours from where I am currently in Moncton, New Brunswick, all the way down to New York yesterday. So that's a lot of work. And I don't know why. Maybe this is I don't know why. Maybe I'm just bad at planning stuff. But I had this presentation, which is right now. I got a new job, so I'm same job, flight instructing, but moving to a new school. And because I'm moving to a new school in another city, I'm moving places. So I'm doing all these three at the same time. I have, on May 1st is my first day for my new job. So I need to drive up 14 hours tomorrow. So, yeah. I mean, for most people this will be tiring. I find it, it's just super exciting. Like, I don't know what tomorrow is going to bring me, but whatever it is, I'm up for the challenge. So a lot of things, a huge thing that people ask me is, are those places that you visit dangerous? And maybe it could be that there was really no danger. I would tell them straight up. I didn't feel that I was in any form of danger. But at the same time, it could be that I'm just a very oblivious person who was very oblivious to the dangers around me. Or maybe those places could be very well not be dangerous at all, right? And I realized that a lot of people have fear. And the fear is not based on some real danger. Or it's not based on some... there could be concerns, but it's not based on, a lot of things that we fear is basically because we don't know what to expect. We don't know enough about what's there. Yeah, we don't know what we're going to see, what we're going to do, what we're going to experience. And I think because of that, a lot of us fear things, fear new places, fear visiting new places and doing new things and stuff. But I always tell my friends, go in without any expectations, go in without any plans like what I did. Because when you plan stuff, you're mostly going to see what you wanted to see, you're going to experience what you wanted to experience, you're going to see, and you're going to meet people whom you wanted to meet. But if you go in without any plan, it's just an open heart and open mind, you're going to see a lot of unexpected things. You're going to be in a lot of unexpected places. And you're going to meet a lot of unexpected and very unique people. And, honestly, from personal experience, and I think I'm very qualified to say that, that's the beauty of traveling, and I feel that's the beauty of life itself, the unexpected, right? And I sound like I'm someone who is like in my 80s or 90s talking about life experience. I'm only 24, but yeah, from my personal life experience so far, that is my, that is the biggest takeaway I hope that you guys will bring home. Yeah. So thank you everyone for coming today. I hope the food. Thank you. I hope my presentation was as good as the food, or maybe the other way around. But so bon appetit, guys, and have fun looking through the photos. So thank you.